In 11-7, we're going to talk more about how to graph those inverse functions that we were talking about before. So let's scroll down and take a look at this box. And what we're going to do now is we're going to learn how to move it left and right, up and down. And those are the asymptotes that we're going to move left, right, up, and down. So we're going to still have things that we approach that never touch, but we'll talk about that as we move along. Okay. One of the key understandings for today is that inverse variations, and that's what we studied yesterday. Inverse variations are examples of rational functions. A rational function can be written in the form where you have one polynomial over another polynomial, where the denominator is never allowed to be 0. So if you take a look down here, what this is going to talk about is how to identify asymptotes. Like, what is x not allowed to be? So if we take a look, let's say that we have a number over x minus b, or anything over x minus a value. That has a vertical asymptote at that b value, and it has a horizontal asymptote if you add a value in the back. Now they give you an example that might make more sense. Pretend we have 1 over x plus 4. We know on that problem, if we have x plus 4, we know that x is never allowed to be negative 4. It's what you're used to hearing as an excluded value. So if you look here, their vertical asymptote would be x equals negative 4. In other words, it's the excluded value. That's where your asymptote would be because it could never touch that value. The horizontal asymptote would be the number that's actually in the back. Whether it's a positive or negative, it keeps its sign. That's the vertical asymptote. So if we had an xy chart on this problem, at negative 4 for x, it would never touch this vertical line. And at positive 1 for y, it would never touch that line. Okay? So our inverse function probably would be here and here. Okay? So we're moving the asymptotes. The xy axis used to be the asymptotes. We're moving them left, right, up, and down today. Okay. Identifying excluded values. And this is going to be easy for you guys because we talked about this in chapter 11, section 1. You guys should know that x cannot be, on this problem, what can x not be? Well, you would say x minus 2 is not allowed to be 0. Therefore, x is not allowed to be 2. That would be an excluded value. Okay? Now in part B, you would say x plus 8, since it's the denominator, is not allowed to be 0. So your excluded value here is a negative 8 when you solve. So 2 and negative 8 are what we call the excluded values. What is the excluded value here? Well, since x plus 7 is not allowed to be 0, you solve x is not allowed to be negative 7. So our excluded value on this one is negative 7. None of that is new to you. You know how to find excluded values, but what you don't know is how to help them let those excluded values actually help you graph. Moving on to problem 2. What's the vertical asymptote? And then they want us to graph it. Well, the vertical asymptote is where x plus 2, remember how it's not allowed to be 0? So what we're going to say is x isn't allowed to be negative 2. So negative 2 is the vertical asymptote. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a crayon or a colored pencil, and I'm going to go to my graph, and I'm going to go to where x equals negative 2. And that is right here. I'm going to draw a dotted line to indicate that that is my new vertical asymptote. And I'm using a colored pencil so it kind of sticks out whenever I go to make my graph. This does not have a horizontal asymptote other than the normal asymptote of the axis here. It still has that asymptote. We've never changed that yet. I'll teach you how to change that in a little bit. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pick x values for our xy chart to plug in, just like we would have yesterday. Now you should understand that this time negative 2 is going to be our center point that it's not allowed to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this line in half, and I'm going to say negative 2 would be in the middle here. So once we get our middle point, we need to try to figure out how do we want to skip on these. I'm just going to give you the hint that I guess since we're kind of picking random x's, I will suggest skipping by 1. So like what's a little bigger than -2? -1. And then skipping by 2. So a little bigger would be +1, a little bigger +3, a little bigger +5. And you can continue with that. You can go to +7. And this is just so we can get a nice graph when we go to this. What's a little lower than -2? You can see all the white out. I had to redo my problem. A little lower, we could do -3, then skip by 2s. -5, -7, -9. And those are just, that's the way that I'm going to pick. Let's see how it works out. If it doesn't work out nicely, then we might need to pick more x's. Let's start with plugging in -1. So if we do 5 over -1 plus 2, that gives me 5 over a +1, which is 5. That's good. Now let's plug in 1. So 5 over 1 plus 2 is 5 over 3. So when I go to graph that one, it's not going to be quite as pretty, is it? Because 5 over 3 is 1.7. Now let's plug in 3. 5 over 3 plus 2, and I'm just getting that from my function up here. That's 5 over 5, that's 1. 5 over 5 plus 5, that's 5 over 10, which is 0.5. And last, 5 over 7 plus, and that should be plus 2 here. That should be 5 over 5 plus 2, which is 5 over 7. Okay, 5 over 7 is 0.7. Got ahead of myself. And 7 will be 5 over 7 plus 2, that's 5 over 9, and 5 over 9 is 0.6. So I can see I'm kind of leveling out, so I'm just going to stop there. Now let's plug in -3. So you do 5 over -3 plus 2, 5 over -1, that's -5. Now let's do -5. 5 over -5 plus 2, that's 5 over -3, which is -1.7. And that's good. It's going to hopefully reflect here. 5 over -7 plus 2, that's 5 over -5, which is -1. That's good. See how they're reflecting because I skipped evenly? And last, 5 over -9 plus 2 is 5 over -7, which is -0.7. And I could graph more, but that's going to be good enough. Let's go ahead and plot these. They aren't very pretty. I'm going to start with down here. I'm going to go over 7 up 0.6. And really, that's a point. I'm going over 7 like from the origin. Okay, over 7 up 0.6. Now over 5 and up 0.7, so not much higher at all. Over 3 up 1. Over 1 up 1.7. And over -1 up 5. Alright, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect those. You can see how the shape is coming to be. Okay, and let's do the other side. -3, -5. -5, -1.7. -7, -1. -9, -0.7. And you can see how we're getting the same shape on both sides. Remember, it approaches your asymptote, but it never touches. And really, you can see how important that asymptote is for us to be able to find, because it really helps us understand what the graph should look like. Let's try this one more time. Now let's find the vertical asymptote. Remember that x minus 6 should never be 0, so x should never be a positive 6. So my vertical asymptote is where x is 6. Alright, so I guess I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to go to where x equals 6 and I'm going to make my vertical asymptote. Alright, and remember your horizontal asymptote, we haven't learned how to change that yet, so it's going to approach the x-axis for the y values. Give yourself an xy chart, a nice big one again, remembering that in the middle of your chart would be 6 because that's your asymptote, okay? So a little lower would be 5, then we can skip by 2's going down. A little higher would be 7, and then we can skip by 2's going down. Let's plug in some values. I'm going to start with 13. Are you ready? So I'm going to do this equation up here, plugging in 13. Negative 3 over 13 minus 6 is negative 3 over 7. That's going to be a decimal. Negative 0.4 approximately. Now 11. Negative 3 over 11 minus 6 is negative 3 over 5, which is negative 0.6. Okay, 9. Negative 3 over 9 minus 6, negative 3 over 3, negative 1. At least we have one nice point. And 7. Negative 3 over 7 minus 6 is negative 3 over 1, which is negative 3. So I have some nice points. Now I'm going to plug in the ones up here. You ready? Negative 3 over 5 minus 6 is negative 3 over negative 1, so I get a positive 3. Look how they're starting to reflect. Negative 3 over 3 minus 6 is negative 3 over negative 3, which is a positive 1. Again, we see the reflection. Negative 3 over 1 minus 6 is negative 3 over negative 5, which is positive 0.6. And negative 3 over negative 1 minus 6 is negative 3 over negative 7, which is a positive 0.4. Let's plot these points and see how nice the inverse function looks. Okay. So we'll do negative 1.4. So left 1, up 0.4. Positive 1, up 0.6. Positive 3, up 1. You can see it's starting to take shape. Positive 5, up 3. And there, it finally took that turn on its way up. Go ahead and connect those. Remember, it approaches your asymptotes but never touches them. And let's do the other side. Positive 7, down negative 3, positive 9, down negative 1, positive 11, negative 0.6, and if I had a couple extra lines here, positive 13, down 0.4. And you can see how that one's coming to be into shape as well. Now, remember, when there's a negative for your inverse, it is going to be in the top left quadrant and the bottom right quadrant. Quadrant. Alright. So we talked about moving it left and right. Now what we need to do is talk about moving it up and down. Okay? So you guys see this x minus 1 here? We're going to tell the two asymptotes. So we're going to say x minus 1 is not allowed to be 0, so x is not allowed to be 1. Therefore, you got a vertical asymptote at x equals 1. And you see that minus 2 in the back? Watch how easy this is. That minus 2 in the back is your horizontal asymptote. Okay, you just write, there's a horizontal asymptote at y equals -2. Okay, so when there's a number in the back, that tells you your horizontal asymptote, and you just make sure that the denominator can't be 0, and that's your vertical asymptote. So if you were to draw this one, your asymptotes would be where x equals 1, so right here, and where y is -2. So you can see we shifted it to the right, and we shifted it down. Now, because this is a +3 on the top, I will note that my graph will go, ready, like this, because it's a +3, and like this. Pause the video. In fact, I'm just going to make a new video with it already plotted. Before I do that, let's make an XY chart so you know what some good values to pick would be. And then I'm going to have you practice plugging them in on your own. Okay, I know in the middle would be 1. Okay, in the middle would be a +1 for the x value. So I'm going to go a little lower, and I'm going to do 0, then I'm going to plug in -2, -4, -6. I'm going to go a little higher, 2, and then +4, +6, +8. I'm going to plug those values in. Please take the time to do so yourself, and then let's check our answers together on the next video.